Brazil is the fifth largest country in the world, containing a wide variety of biomes, including a large portion of the Amazon rainforest, and possessing a great amount of natural resources. Brazil has the tools to become a world power. Yet despite these advantages and its recent improvements attributed to its recovery effort from the 2008 economic recession, Brazil is still considered a developing nation.
Comparing Brazil's population at two different points of time in history, we can see that Brazil's exponential growth stopped around 2008. This was because of the 2008 recession, which resulted in a decrease in fertility rates, therefore slowing the country's growth. By 2050, it is estimated that Brazil's population will peak at a whopping 238 million and then will experience a die-off. Brazil's crude birth rate has had a somewhat linear decrease over time, with a current rate of 14.1 out of 1,000 and a projected birth rate of 9.39 out of 1,000. Brazil's death rate, however, shows a different story. Over time, the crude death rate has decreased linearly but has leveled off around 2008. The current crude death rate is 6.7 and will increase by 2050 to 9.91. Doubling time is calculated by subtracting the crude death rate from the crude birth rate to arrive at a net growth rate. From there, the net growth rate is converted to an annual growth rate in a percentage form. 70 over the annual growth rate is equal to the doubling time. This means that it will take 94.59 years for Brazil's population to double its current population.
Over the past 50 years or so, Brazil was in the height of its development, evident through the population growth across the generations, or stage 2 of the demographic transition model, while only recently has the population begun to level. In this stage, the population explodes, as children are seen as important assets and birth control is uncommon. As mentioned, Brazil's population has begun to level over the past few age groups, providing evidence for recent development. This development shows transition into stage 3 of the demographic transition model, as Brazil's recovery from the economic recession of 2008 has allowed them to gain a new level of economic prosperity, and as a result, families have started to family plan and reduce the amount of children being born.
After the 2008 recession, Brazilians were forced to think about the well-being of their families. Because there was a scarcity of jobs and wealth, adults started to have just the right amount of children, not too many that they couldn't provide for, but not too little for help around the house. Thinking of their progeny as economic assets, Brazilian families across the country halted Brazil's drastically decreasing fertility rate.
85.5% of Brazil's population lives in the cities along the eastern Atlantic shore, resulting in a large percentage of people being clustered into a small area, while leaving the rest of Brazil fairly sparse. Efforts have been made in an attempt to migrate some of the population out of the cluster of cities and into the northwest by instituting a forward capital, Brasilia, away from the big eastern cities. The clustering of large amounts of people into a small area inherently leads to overpopulation and slum-like living, which occurs in Brazil's large eastern cities. 6% of Brazil's population, or 11.25 million people, live in these slums called favelas. In Rio de Janeiro, 1.4 of the 6.32 million people live in slums, a staggering 22% of its population. With 1 in 5 people living in favelas in Brazil's eastern cities, living conditions are quite poor. Brazilian favelas tend to be unregulated, lacking basic services, leading to high amounts of crime. While most favelas have running water and electricity, sanitation is a major problem, as sewage often runs through channels within houses, which can lead to sickness and disease.
The Zika virus, a disease that causes microcephaly in infants that it spreads to, made the country go into a state of panic in 2015. In early 2018, Brazil again fell to disease called the yellow fever. In both instances, the Brazilian government took necessary action and provided the public with vaccinations and healthcare against these monstrous epidemics.
Illegal logging is a serious deforestation issue, destroying the Amazon, which is home to 13% of the world's species. Waste management is also a serious concern, as Brazil lacks an efficient waste collection program, leading to large-scale pollution and ozone depletion. Fortunately, recent efforts have been made to improve the waste management and deforestation issues, yet these major problems still exist.
As we can see, a majority of Brazil's energy sources comes from hydropower, because water is the most available resource given the country's geographical area. Looking at Brazil's ecological footprint versus the Human Development Index, it is evident that Brazil is not highly developed, far behind more industrialized countries like Japan and America.
The Gini coefficient is a measure of economic inequality ranging from 0 to 1, 0 meaning all the wealth in the nation is distributed equally, while 1 meaning all the wealth is controlled by one person. Brazil has a Gini coefficient of 0.51, much lower than what it was in 1980 at 0.58, but still making Brazil one of the most economically unequal nations in the world. We know that Brazil is a developing nation because of its high amounts of economic inequality compared to developed nations with a much lower Gini coefficient. In addition, approximately 25% of the population, more than 50 million people, live below the poverty line, earning $5.50 or lower daily, and with little opportunity, it is nearly impossible for these people to rise above their economic class.
Under Brazil's former president Lula da Silva and his Bolsa Familia program, which offers aid to those who need it, 30 million people managed to escape poverty and join the ranks of the country's new middle class, establishing economic stability. However, the downside to this milestone event is that the clash between opinions of former and current governments doesn't facilitate the smoothest transition from rags to riches. Brazil's gross domestic product has taken a rollercoaster ride throughout history. It has been in an upward rise up until 2013. This is because from 2014 to 2016, Brazil's severe economic crisis caused their GDP to fall by 4%, but it has made a climb up to where it is now. Brazil's GDP currently stands at $2,055 billion and is predicted to rise to $10,000 billion in 2050. Though we cannot accurately calculate a country's exact impact on the environment because we lack affluence per person and technology, the country's population and GDP per capita show us a lot. Treating GDP as a country's affluence, we can see that Brazil has a much lower impact on the environment than the United States of America does. Based on Brazil's past efforts to achieve global sustainability through its participation in the Paris Agreement, the Aichi biodiversity targets, sustainable development goals, and the new urban agenda, the country is on a great track towards sustainability. Now, the real challenge will be for the current government to use Brazil's federal budget on sustainable efforts instead of on unnecessary policy and new infrastructure.
Brazil's soccer team has a profound influence on all the people throughout Brazil, especially for those at the bottom of the hierarchy. Soccer brings a sense of community among the people of Brazil, uniting all the social classes together as one. Players like Pele and Neymar are a symbol of the possibility of success to the people in the lower classes, as they are motivated to work like these players to improve their status in life.